remember about 1 to 2 years ago, I did a video on what it was like to date a French man. And I thought it's time for an update because then I was young, I was naive, it was COVID, the world was completely different. And as a result, I think now that I've had more experience dating a French man, and also I have a lot more friends who also have had, dating experiences with French men, I thought that it would be time to give you a good update and let you know what I still think are the good and the not so good sides about dating a French man. Hello. For those who do not know, my name is Adriel. I'm an American who is in Paris. Let's get into this. So as I noted, I have a lot of friends who are dating Frenchmen, have dated Frenchmen, are married to Frenchmen, are paxed to Frenchmen, all of the things, right? So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based not only on my personal experiences, but also on some of my friends' experiences as well. So please do not come for a homegirl too much in the comments because this has been, real lived experiences of a lot of women that I know who are living in Paris. The first thing I want to talk about is what I'd like to call the cringe. Whether dating or married, inevitably I have seen every single American female friend I know who is dating a French man at some point do the cringe when he speaks. Now, the reason for the cringe is because as Americans, there are just certain things we don't generally say, things that we're generally aware enough we are self-aware enough to know that those things are insensitive, maybe they're not politically correct, they're not kind of reflective of, I don't know how best to say it, maybe a more modern way of thinking, right? There are certain things that you just kind of don't really do. When I say that this is not a part of French culture, it is not a part of French culture at all, honey. Literally, when you sometimes want to correct him or he is saying something that's just like, oh my gosh, why are you saying that? They will, the French will kind of jump all over you because they view Americans as being too sensitive. Americans are too sensitive and we're, always trying to watch our words. We're always trying to be careful and, you just get to say it. So one of the things I have noticed is that you could never tell a French man in particular that something he said was racially or culturally insensitive. That man will argue you down, honey, telling you that it's not, you're just an American and you're too sensitive. And let me give you an example of something that I actually personally witnessed and I watched as the American woman cringed and everyone else just tried to kind of laugh it off. And this tends to happen, I want to note that this context, these sorts of experiences tend to happen when it's the American woman around other Americans and the French man says something. This is kind of when you experience the cringe. When everybody's French, they're just gonna say all sorts of wild things and you're gonna be the one who's like, oh my gosh. So case in point example, I was at a dinner with a friend and her French boyfriend. And the French boyfriend was trying to say, oh yes, so-and-so, and he was saying the name of this girl and it was an Asian name. And with his French accent, it kind of wasn't sounding quite right. And the guy goes, the person he was talking to goes, no, I don't think I know her. And he goes, yes, she's the Asian girl. And then proceeded, I won't do the gesture, but then proceeded to take his fingers and use them to pull up his eyes. And everyone at the table was American other than the French guy. And you could see everyone just got super uncomfortable and then just kind of tried to laugh it off. That's what I mean when I say the cringe. These sweet little Frenchmen, they will say these things and they are just not acceptable. Now, one of the next things kind of related to that I have noticed in dating a French man and then also kind of in having friends who are dating or married to a French man is there was nothing wrong with that. Now, what this basically means, and this generally involves a situation where another French person does or says something to you that's kind of crazy. Like, they do something that you as a woman just know is not cool. And inevitably, the man's response is always, oh no, that's not at all what she meant by that. Or no, that's not at all what that person meant by that. It's like, what you're telling them is the reality that you can see is, no, that's not the reality. Because remember, you're an American and you're always sensitive. So I'll give you yet another example of this. Julian had paid for me and him to go have a tour of an exhibition at a museum. It was supposed to be a group tour. He had paid for it through his job, so as a result, it kind of was like a discounted rate. The thing though about this museum is I actually happen to have a membership to the museum, so he didn't actually need to pay for me to have a ticket. As a result, I was like, see if you can, maybe get your money back, but if not, that's fine. We get to the point where we're meeting with the group, we're all there, we're waiting, and he happens to mention to the lady who's leading the tour, oh, she already has a subscription to this museum. So she doesn't need, she won't need the ticket. Will I be able to get a refund for it? The woman goes, oh, you have a subscription to this museum? And I was like, yes, I have a subscription to the museum. Well, do you have your card with you? Because give me your card, because then I'm gonna show them your card. Give me your card right now. Now that's how she was talking to me. And I was looking at this woman like, why are you talking to me like that? We could have this discussion in a much more polite way. Whatever. I give her the card. She goes and she's like, yes, your card is valid. You're all set. You can go in. Well, of course I'm all set. He also already bought a ticket. And so then I look at Julian and I was like, did you see how crazy she talked to me? And he goes, no, there was nothing wrong with the way that she spoke to you. I was like, yes, it was rude how she spoke to me. He goes, no. There was nothing wrong. It's like her tone was crazy. She spoke to me like I was a child. No, there was nothing wrong with the way she spoke to you. And I just looked at him and I said, well, are you going to be getting the money back for the ticket? Because clearly now she's not buying a ticket for me right now in the moment. Because I thought she had all the tickets in advance. She didn't. She was buying them in the moment. And he goes, that's a good question. Maybe I should ask. Yes, we should ask. And also that woman spoke to me crazy. Another example at a friend where her boyfriend at the time, his roommates, one of them was a woman, and the woman gave him just a lot of attention. And every time she brought it up, he basically was like, no, you're completely reading into it. She's nice, she's this, she's not interested in me, blah, 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 on and on and on. And then finally one day, the girl did something that it was just so glaringly obvious. Only when it was glaringly obvious did he go, yeah, her behavior is a little bit inappropriate towards me sometimes. But it had to be something so kind of over the top before he could see it. Otherwise, no, that you completely saw it wrong. That didn't happen. That's, you're not understanding it. So as a result, that's one thing that happens and it will drive you crazy as a woman. And French men do that all the time, and frankly, I think it's something that's actually very much a part of French culture of like, no, that's not what that meant, that's not what happened, you're overreacting. So another thing that you're definitely going to kind of need to be aware of when it comes to dating a French man is that they are very, very opinionated, they are very, very stubborn, they love to give instruction, and frankly, again, these are all things that I would say are parts of French culture. And frankly, they're some of the parts that I dislike the most. So one thing I would say about French culture is that it is very, very confrontational. Way more confrontational than American culture. They think our culture of being nice to people is fake. And so they think that that's a problem. Whereas we consider it to be civility. They believe that we're being fake. So their society is very confrontational. When they have a problem, things get heated very, very quickly. You see that mindset very often. It will kind of come up in your relationships. So, for example, they are so opinionated that if you guys are having a discussion about a particular topic, it can be almost impossible to change that man's mind. So it will just drive you crazy. So and he will get like very upset and like worked up defending his position. So it's not for me, in my opinion, worth it. Like, you can't have a lot of times, you know, just a discussion where it's like, you know, we're discussing our opinions on something and, you know, I'm giving you some new information, so maybe you might change. Like, that isn't happening, because it's just not a part of their culture. So if they have an opinion or a view on something, they will hold on to that until the day they die. And that includes stuff that's really, really small and insignificant, and it can kind of like, it can really get on your nerves, like really, really get on your nerves. So personally for me, like, an example is growing up, you know, I grew up in a normal middle class household. You clean the kitchen at night before you went to bed. We don't want bugs, right? You know, like, that was something that was expected. However, Julian grew up in a castle. So because he grew up in a castle, there were people who did those things for him. So he doesn't necessarily believe you have to have the kitchen clean before you go to bed. You can keep the kitchen dirty for a couple days if you want. I can't do that. Psychologically, I can't do that. So there is constant headbutting over something like that, which to me is just basic cleanliness, like basic cleanliness of your home. Kind of connected to that, they're also very much always complaining about the oppression by the state. When I tell you, I have heard so many complaints about the state. The state did this, the state is bad, the state blah, blah, blah. I'm like, do you know how good you have it compared to Americans? Like, Americans, like, people are poor in America. They die on the street. They don't get 2 years of paid unemployment when they lose their job. That's like their full salary. Like, give me a break. But here, they don't understand, like, the privilege that they have. And so as a result, they're always like, the state is oppressing me, the state is after me, the state is this. And it's like, okay, got it, understood. And last but not least, their stubbornness mainly, like, really primarily manifests itself kind of in French culture. French people love to be French, and if you give your opinion on their culture, oh my gosh, honey, they are going to come for you. They're going to start talking about how America is violent and all of this stuff about America. And it's like, yes, I know America has its flaws, and I can talk about America's flaws. And you are free to talk about America's flaws, but I also live in France, and so I have a perspective, and I should be able to share that perspective without getting into some sort of thing with you. Like, it's an observation of your culture. Like, it's just an observation. Calm down. Be easy, homie. Be easy. So as a result, you see that a lot when it comes to kind of culture. When you try to point out elements of their culture, you will encounter a stubbornness. So in relation to that, I would highlight my next point on what it's like to date a French person, which is that they love to be French. Honey, when I tell you they love to be French, they love to be French. They think France is the greatest country on the face of the earth. They think French, everything French. Woohoo! It's exhausting. I don't have that level of patriotism except on the 4th of July. Their level of patriotism is high. It is very, very high. And so as a result, I think if you do end up, or you're interested in dating a Frenchman, or you're curious about it, I personally think that if you are an American or a foreigner, it's really important to date somebody who has lived outside of France, who has traveled extensively outside of France, who speaks really, really great English. That's usually a sign that they spent a lot of time outside of France, because then they have kind of a broader world perspective, and that really, really helps as far as the, like, I love France. One of the things about Julian that I liked is that, you know, he has lived in a lot of different countries around the world. And so as a result, he has a lot of exposure to a lot of different cultures, which is very helpful. So does he still love France? And does he still love being French? 100%. But is it as intense as I have seen kind of with other friends? No, it's not. Related to their love of being French is also their love of speaking French. The language is something that you're really going to have to be mindful of if it comes to, if you're interested in dating a French man. And I would say language is probably one of the biggest kind of points of contention I have seen in various people's relationships. Because one of two things happens. Either he really wants you to learn French and he becomes kind of like your drill instructor, but it's like in your home, and every time you speak he's correcting you, and it's like this thing, and you can barely get a word out, and your French, however frustrating that is, your French does improve very quickly. There's that. Or you have the guy who just refuses to speak French with you at all. And he's like, no, we're just gonna speak in English because it's too much effort and I don't feel like making that effort with you, and I can speak English so well, so we're just going to speak in English. And it is, either one is a different level of struggle. The one who's sitting there kind of instructing you nit by nit, that just makes you crazy as a woman, right? Like, no, you don't want that in your house. Whereas the other one who's like, I'm not going to speak to you in French at all, that puts you in a position where the person that you frankly see the most and could frankly be your best French teacher, you're not practicing your French at all with them. So as a result, you're frankly in some ways kind of handicapped living in France. One of the things that I have seen is that women have been trapped in relationships because the man speaks French and they don't really speak French, and they need his help like navigating through stuff. And I have definitely, seen women, heard of stories from friends of friends about kind of them being in that situation, and it's really, really difficult. So that's why like learning the language independently as you is just so important, because you want to start your relationship language out in French, because then you can at least improve a bit faster. And if you get one of those guys who's like, I don't want to speak French with you at all, then that's, you got to find the guy in the middle who's like willing to meet you in the Franglish, right? Sometimes it's French, sometimes it's English, and that sort of balance. Another thing that I would also note as far as just language goes is that it can be really, really hard when you're with his French friends and you don't speak French very well, because they don't care. They're just all going to speak to each other in French really, really fast, as if you're almost like you're not there. And then every now and then, maybe every 30 minutes, someone will turn and look at you and be like, and what do you think, Adriel? And you're like, oh, I'm still here. I didn't notice that anybody knew I was still here. That happens a lot, and it's really, really, really unfortunate. The language barrier can really be a very real indicator as to what it's going to be like to date that man long term. And I think it's something you just have to be very aware of. And frankly, I think it can introduce a lot of conflict and a lot of stress into your relationship unnecessarily. So it's the language issue can be, don't minimize it, I guess is what I'm saying. Like that's one of the things I've found. Like, it's very, very frustrating. It's very hard. And yeah, at times it can make dating somebody, French very, very difficult. One of the last things I want to note about dating a French man, and this is going to be based on breakups. And if you'll notice, a lot of the tone in this video, I've been, the first videos I did before, they were more about very focused on some of the positives, but also some of the negatives. With experience and time, I'm seeing more of the things that do frustrate and kind of see more how friends have balanced it, right? And also, when friends haven't balanced it, how they have broken up with that man. And one of the things that I think we absolutely have to talk about that I think is really, really problematic when it comes to dating a French man has to do with what happens when you break up with that French man. I had a friend, and she had been dating a man for a while. She breaks up with him. She then is telling me, like, oh yeah, here's some of the, she starts telling me some of the stuff this man was doing as part of the breakup. And I was like, that sounds like harassment. Like I was like, that sounds like he's harassing her and stalking her maybe. And that's just like, that's like not cool, right? Like this sounds like this could be DV, right? So I listen to this story, I offer her support. I tell her, I'm here for you, whatever way. So then she tells me, a lot of French people, when I've told them about this, they've offered, to help me kind of step in. They've offered to, come to my house if he has to be there when he has to get his stuff. They've offered to really, do that. And she proceeded to kind of rattle off, the man at, the cafe she visits the most, like that waiter offered to come to her house, the sales associate that she knows at a luxury department store who she's close with, he offered to come, help her with that. Like she starts like kind of rattle, and I'm like, that's interesting because these are people who are, they're not her friends in the sense that she sees them every single, she's hanging out with them in her free times. Like these are people who she sees in life and they have a connection, but she sees them at the cafe, she sees them at the store. I keep all of this in mind, right? And later on, I happened to be talking with one of my French female friends, and I mentioned it to her. I said, I have a friend who's going through a breakup, and she was telling me about how all these people are asking her, about like saying things like, has he gotten aggressive with you? Has he started to harass you? And they're offering their aid. And she goes, yes. And I said, what do we mean yes? Like, is this common when you break up with a French man? And she goes, yes. She goes, it is not accepted by our society. It's not acceptable at all. We don't tolerate it. However, it is very normal that when you break up with a French man, that they get very angry, they get somewhat aggressive, and they will start to harass you. I was like, what sort of crazy mess is this? You are so emotionally wrapped up about a breakup that you can't take it? Your response is to harass and stalk a foreigner for months on end? What? I just thought that was the craziest thing, that is something that happens so frequently and so commonly that even people who don't know this person that well were volunteering to come to her house and help her with this man. And I gotta give every single one of them their props that they all were offering to help, my friend. So that is something that I would consider to be a huge, substantial downside as far as dating within French culture, is that, if that is some behavior that might happen, that's awful. Like the retaliatory behavior and stuff that she experienced, it was crazy. So yeah. Now this video isn't meant to say that the good things that I mentioned in my prior videos are no longer true, right? Those good things are still there. Frenchmen, I think, are such great as far as, being very loving. There's not a lot of this toxic masculinity that I was used to in the US. It is a very different dating experience. But, however, what I have learned and what I have observed and what I hope you take from this video is that it's not about necessarily finding a French man. It's about finding the right man for you. Maybe that man is French, maybe he's Italian, maybe he's Spanish. But the point is that we shouldn't get so kind of focused on the idea of dating a French man. Maybe it should be more so focusing on really trying to find the person that is right for us, the person who's going to treat us with the love and respect that we deserve and that we want. And also, being mindful though of the frustrating aspects of it, because you are dating somebody who isn't from your culture. There is likely a language barrier. And so as a result, it is going to have to require some gives and takes. What are you okay with? It's about really figuring out who is right for you and finding that person instead of it being about, oh, I just want a French man or that sort of thing. So with that said, I hope you've enjoyed this updated video on what it's like to date a French man. Please share your thoughts, comments, opinions, anything in the comment section. I look forward to hearing them. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!